good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us I say morning, and then I remember that it's not morning for anyone else. I think it's just morning for me, but it's
It's
about
11
9
a.m.
a.m.
here.
Okay, oh, good. So me and Greg's in Chicago. He's our special guest today. And then I've got my three regular co-hosts, Ben Toth and Paige Hungry, Carlo Parcelli in Washington, D.C., Ian Comer coming from a suburb in Moscow. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you, Greg, very much for being our guest. I see that we already have several live viewers. Thank you, live viewers. We totally appreciate that. If you want to just let us know where you are viewing from, that would be tremendous. So a lot of great news today. I mean, this week, really. I mean, things are just happening very quickly all over the place, and it doesn't look good for Western imperialism. But they're making these promises. So that's kind of a reference to our title today. The Ironclad support is being offered to everyone from Israel, the Philippines, Ukraine, Japan, and there's probably a half dozen more places that escape me currently. But where to start, guys? I know. I just learned a second ago. Breaking news. Ian let everyone know that Russell Bentley has been missing for about 4 days. So that's like a serious issue. We are definitely sorry to hear about that. Ian, could you just maybe share the context within which this has taken place?
Yes, so Russell Bentley, for those of you who don't know, he is an American citizen, Army veteran who went to Donetsk all the way back in 2014, right when after Maidan and the war started. He went there as a volunteer, and then his fighting career was a little brief. He switched to journalism because, as a Westerner, as an outsider, he was found to be helpful to getting the message out, getting the Donbass advocacy out to, non-Russian speaking audiences, to English speaking audiences. So he became a big journalist and advocate actually in Donbass, and that's where he stayed even after hostilities cooled down a bit after 2014. He stays there. He married a Russian woman there, and unfortunately, so basically what's happened is on April 8th, there was another shelling in Donetsk, and he left his wife and ran towards where the sound was, and then he's been missing ever since. So some of his personal possessions were found afterwards. His phone was found, but Russell himself is gone. And he's also not been on social media either, because I looked. As soon as I saw this story, he went dark. So, and the police apparently officially list him as missing right now. There's no further information yet.
So we're gonna hope for the best. I will promise that I will do everything to get him on our program once he returns. I know Regis has had him on his program several times. He's talked with Scott Ritter and all the regulars. But yeah, he's a tremendous hero, and so we hope for his speedy return.
Yeah, and Paulie is right. He was one of the first to report from the Donbass area before Mike, known as foreign agent, before the guy who also had a name like Dugan, something Dugan, another American. Yeah, Texas Bentley. And I just want to add that I've seen this on Telegram, but Ian checked it out, that it's basically mainstream now. So it's on Reuters. It's like officially on the missing list in Donetsk. So it sounds like foul play. I don't want to speculate, but I hope for the best.
And Russell did write a book, which I've read. It's a little esoteric. It's not advertised very widely, but he did write a book about his experiences in 2014, which I read, and it's very good. Unfortunately, I can't ask him right now where people can buy it, but it's out there. That he did write a book.
He's kind of documenting how the Kiev regime was persecuting ethnic
He's
Russians.
done a lot of that. He's very active on social media. He does a lot of interviews. He does a lot of in-person engagements. Like he'll travel. I know he's traveled back into to Moscow and other big cities and giving presentations there. And he wrote a book, and his book is more on a personal level. It's about how he first heard the news about the Maidan Revolution, the fighting was breaking out, and so he basically just bought a plane ticket, went through Rostov-on-Don, and basically found a militia, an ad hoc militia there, and not in Rostov, in Donetsk, and basically started fighting right from the beginning, right from the very good. It's just very good first person. Probably the best thing I've seen.
Yeah, so we hope he's okay, and we will. I will reach out to him and have him on a program to discuss things. So I asked our viewers just to let us know where they're from. So we've got Canada, we've got Norway, we've got Missouri, Amsterdam.
Amsterdam. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, quite an international audience. So that's very interesting. And another one from Belgium. Well, Amsterdam. Where's Amsterdam? That's
also in Netherlands.
Netherlands. Yeah. Okay, guys. So Ironclad support. Where exactly is where is the West winning? Like what battlefield, what situation is the U.S. Winning the struggle against the imperialist resistance? Anywhere?
Doesn't look like it. Not in any active conflict. They're winning in the TV. They're winning in the PR media war. And we got some clips with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in Washington, and I'm just wondering what the fuck would I feel if I were Japanese looking at all this. I mean, just like who was the American Pie guy? That was the South Korean.
The South Korean, yeah.
South Korean Yoon Suk-yeol. I would feel totally embarrassed, but this guy made it worse. So maybe you guys want to watch a couple of clips and
yes.
think what you. All right. So here we start off with the headlines were the Star Trek theme because that's what he does. He's a westernized puppet. There's a new puppet in town. Let's listen.
I don't hear anything.
I am an idiot because again I didn't add to the sharing that I have to have system audio. Sorry about this, guys. Billy Bob had a wonderful 4 nights of sleep. Unfortunately, mine was a little bit more rough. So hopefully now, if I play it, you should hear something.
Yes.
Let me conclude with a line from Star Trek. I wish you all luck to boldly go where no one has gone before.
Hooray! Claps.
To propose a toast to our voyage to the frontier of the Japan-U.S. relationship with this world. Boldly go. And boldly go. Cheers.
I mean, that to me is just a grand scale humiliation. But on top of it, he was sent to Arlington Cemetery, guys, just to he was forced to do this.
Is this to apologize? Is to apologize for Pearl Harbor? Is that what that was? Is that?
That's bowing for the dead enemy, I guess. And on top of that, then Joe Biden, this old guy, was standing next to him, saying these things. It's very short. Last one.
Well, we are the same, Japan and the United States. We may be divided by distance, but generations after generation, we've been brought together, the same hopes, the same values. Well,
I mean, I think that should have been filmed basically on Maui Island, maybe in Pearl Harbor itself.
He said we fought for the same values. Is that what he said?
Yes, for generation over generation.
Yeah.
We are the same.
So
Yeah.
We were fighting for the same values. That's good to know.
To keep the emperor in power, and
Hirohito.
what I don't even know what that means.
Final.
Ironclad is a Civil
I'm
War
not
term.
sure Biden even knows what that means,
No.
to be honest. He saw it in the teleprompter and he said it. So ask his speechwriter what it means.
All right.
What's
I'm
One
just
more.
going to say
one
that
more-
ironclad is a Civil War term for a ship made of iron that was used in the Civil War. It's
And iron.
an anachronism. It's kind of cliche. And
Oh, I didn't know
anyway.
that. Final one. There are also, I guess, Japanese speechwriters, or we just got the papers from Washington, but this is the last one where he talked about the Russians persisting in nuclear threats like again.
Ukraine of today, maybe East Asia of tomorrow.
By the way, that was the Ukraine of today. It just got cut off. So the Ukraine of today is the East Asia's tomorrow. And I guess he's proud of volunteering this information. Anyway, going on. To standing ovation, of course.
Furthermore, Russia continues to threaten the use of nuclear weapons, which has contributed to worldwide concern that yet another catastrophe by nuclear weapon use is a real possibility. In this reality,
I mean, yeah, that's it. That's the clip. I don't know where to put that. The only nation in the world that ever got nuked twice by the US, saying this to US Congress.
There was I forget what year it was, but that Olympics that happened in Japan a few years back. I forget which year it was, but the Japanese, it actually fell on one of the days of the Olympics fell on August 8th, the anniversary of I think it was the Hiroshima. I honestly can't remember if it was the Hiroshima or the Nagasaki bombing, but basically they requested to do a moment of silence for the bombing victims, and the International Committee basically said no. So basically, Japan asked to honor the victims of this nuclear holocaust, and the USA essentially said no. No, even though it's happening in your country, we can't do that. No,
I guess there wasn't an SMO yet, so they couldn't do it and blame Russia at that time. Maybe it was
Well-
it was before.
well, they're
Yeah, no,
already
I mean,
blaming. I wonder how long it'll be before they say Russia was somehow responsible for it.
Well, actually, they could blame Russia because many scholars say, and I agree with them, that one of the main reasons they nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki was to deter the Soviet Union, to threaten basically the Soviet Union.
It's well documented. It's declassified that it was a message to Stalin. Step out of line. This happens to you. Yeah. Absolutely.
No,
Yeah, it was
the
totally unnecessary.
Rosenbergs.
Oh, go ahead.
The Rosenbergs, the people who leaked America's nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union. I mean, they got the death
smuggled them
penalty.
out. Yes.
Yes, they got the death penalty. I mean, you can tell how mad they were that they didn't have that monopoly on nuclear weapons anymore. That completely changed the ballgame. I mean, I'm sure the Soviet Union would have eventually developed it on their own, even without that leaked information. But still, it is. I mean, they got the death penalty. I mean, you really have to get them mad to get sentenced to death and actually executed that quick, like the Rosenbergs did. So
in an important scientific field. Yeah, that's tough.
So the context within which this fealty to Westernism, demonstrated by the president of Japan or the prime minister of Japan,
Prime Minister Kishida,
is essentially the pivot to Asia, right? It's the new coming Cold War against China, and we have to enlist Japan, and Japan can't be constrained by these archaic World War II treaties that says they can't have an offensive military. So we've got to, reinvigorate that relationship. We've got to start developing and building up Japan's military so we can use them like we used Ukraine as a proxy, but this time against China. And so that's the context within which this is taking place. And it's basically the prime minister is demonstrating his fealty to U.S. supremacy by saying, hey, I will enlist my country, our country's blood and our country's economy in the service of your anti-China, ambitions.
Well,
deputized.
it's anti-Russia too. I mean, Japan is an important partner. That's the word they like to use. An important partner against Russia as well. I mean,
Don't forget the Kuril Islands, which went to the
Yes.
Soviet Union in
Yeah.
1945.
No,
yeah.
no, great point. And so you could hear him saying, you know, we totally stand with the West against Russia on the issue of Ukraine. But
that-
you know, it's
That was part of the most enjoyable things that Kishida and Marcos Bongbong, the junior of the Philippines prime minister, they were both in the White House lawn, you know, holding hands like two diligent puppets. But when he addressed Congress, which is when he said that the Ukraine of today is the East Asia's tomorrow, he was lobbying for the aid to Ukraine. Basically, you know, that's what's most enjoyable to me. Like, this thing is falling apart so fast. A lot of the headlines are about alarm. We're running out. There's no air defense. It's like it could crumble, all of that. And he went there to address Congress to put some aid in there. And a second, I wouldn't call it a puppet, but someone who still thinks he's relevant is the foreign. They don't have ministers. The foreign secretary of Britain, David Cameron, also went there, and he got refused to speak with the speaker, whose name is Mike Johnson. He got refused by Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, but he still went to Congress. And I sped it up because, you know, English they're slow, but let's just see his statement there.
Support from NATO allies and a good outcome to the NATO summit, which we were discussing this morning. And we know that they need money in the form of the frozen Russian sovereign assets. And we're making good progress in how to access that funds on an agreed basis that I think we can take forward to the G7. And of course, in terms of the money they need and the support they need, perhaps nothing is more important than the supplemental that the Congress is looking at the moment. And I come here with no intention to lecture anybody or tell anybody what to do or get in the way of the process of politics and other things in the United States. I just come here as a great friend and believer in this country, and a believer that it's profoundly in your interests and your security and your future and the future of all your partners to release this money and let it through. And I'm looking forward to meetings I'm going to be having in Congress later today. And
So it's in your interest. It's the Lindsey Graham best investment we ever made. They're all panicking that this thing won't. And by the way, he had to grovel to Trump, and apparently that meeting did not go well. A lot of the European diplomats are having to go to Trump. They don't want to, but apparently that's the guy to go to if you want to get this past Congress. And I'm loving the hell out of this. I really am, especially that Japan says, hey, you just let these guys be destroyed and we're next. At least there's some self-preservation instinct there. That's what I
you know, there's a little bit of back history between Eastern Europe and Japan. Actually, not many people know this, but after the Pearl Harbor attack and the Japanese declaration of war on the USA declared war back, and the USA's allies were also obligated to declare war on Japan as well, because they're allies of the USA, including the Polish government in exile. Japan actually rejected Poland's declaration of war. They just said, we don't accept it because we like Poland and we understand that Poland is obligated to declare war on us because they're allies of the USA. And what's interesting about that is because when Germany invaded Poland, Japan was actually very upset about it because Germany had made a backroom deal with the Soviet Union. And Soviet Union and Japan, even though they had a non-aggression pact, they did not. I mean, after that, they stopped trusting Hitler, much like, you know, the West stopped trusting Hitler. Because, like, if you're willing to make a deal with the Soviet Union once, that just was the Japanese considered that a total breach of trust. And that was significant because Germany was pressuring Japan to open a second front with the Soviet Union. Because, you know, because of the oil embargo by the USA and Britain, the Japanese basically had a choice: do we attack the Soviet Union or do we attack, you know, the Western colonies and get for a new source of oil? So they ended up opting, you know, we don't want to relive the, you know, the Manchurian War with the Soviet Union. So they opted to do Pearl Harbor and attack the Philippines and Singapore. So that's a little bit.
I'd like to make a comment about a Star Wars comment and see if you can find it in my conversation here, my little speech here. If Japan wants to pick a fight with China, China has got is still burning over the occupation of Japan prior to World War II and during World War II, and what Japan did to China, raping women, Nanking.
Nanking or Nanjing massacre. Just read up on it. It's horrific.
They were horrific. And believe me, if Japan wants to get involved, China is ready, and China will take that little turkey apart. There's not a country in this galaxy, that's a Star Trek reference, in this galaxy that would prefer to go out and dismember Japan than China. Let them try it. Dumbasses. I'm sorry.
So I like the history angle, and I have a few items to share, and I'm not sure what relevance Ian will take from these points, but it's absolutely true that Hitler was really hoping that Japan would open up a second front against the Soviets and cause them to have to fight a two-front war. And that was actually the reason why Hitler threw a Hail Mary pass by declaring war on the United States. So he didn't have any reason to declare war on the United States, but when Japan attacked the United States declared war against Japan, and then Germany didn't need to declare war against the United States, but because they were allied with Japan and because they really wanted to show solidarity and hope that Japan would respond by opening up a front in the Soviet Union,
I didn't know
Hitler foolishly declared war against the United States. He initiated that. The United States probably wouldn't have even bothered. I mean, maybe later they would have done it, but the way it played out was that Hitler did that in order to try and show how close he was with Japan, in the hopes that Japan would reciprocate, and that never happened, obviously. And the other thing was, it was not until like the day of, or even the day after, immediately following Russia's or the Soviet Union's peace deal with Japan in the East, that they did go into Poland. It was like the same day or the next day that they went into Poland. It was a few weeks after Germany had went into Poland. Once they secured their eastern flank with an official treaty, or at least a ceasefire of some sort, that's when they went into Poland. But so it's some interesting history that definitely we don't learn in social studies, because everything we learn in the West is sanitized for liberal consumption and to push the false liberal narratives.
I want to add to that what you said is this Anglo-Japanese alliance isn't new either. It started early 20th century. Japan was obligated was basically because they were very isolationist up until the USA sent their White Fleet on a tour and basically forced them to take a trade deal that was actually very disadvantageous to them. Honestly, it was very beneficial for Western powers, disadvantageous to Japan. But so that was the stick. But the carrot was that the British and USA and France recognized Japan as the big hegemon in East Asia. And there were two big treaties with them, with the Anglos and the Japanese, that made them feel very big. And then in the 1930s, when they started their war with China under the Roosevelt administration, the Roosevelt took China's side, which was very confusing and angering to the Japanese. It's just like, we know you don't care about the Chinese. You don't care how, you don't, since when have Anglos ever cared about how many Chinese people are killed ever? Now you're all of a sudden putting out all this propaganda. You're sending arms and money to China. The Japanese
flying tigers, they
could not. I mean, they understood why the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union also sent pilots and aides to China too, which isn't publicized heavily now for obvious reasons. But they could understand what the Soviet Union did, but why are our allies, why are the Anglos doing this to us? That was very angering and insulting to the Japanese Empire. They could not.
Their first lesson in Anglo treachery.
Yes, it is, because they thought,
not the last.
When they had that treaty with the Anglos, with the Anglo powers, they thought that signaled respect. Oh, the Westerners, the white man respects us as fellow warriors, and that's just it was. And I think that's important lesson. You know, when the British and the USA sign a treaty with you, it's not respect. You're just at that particular moment useful. Doesn't mean they respect you, which is what the Japanese interpreted as respect.
And
it wasn't.
You wish current Japan would have that understanding now. That, I mean, you guys are you're it's pathetic. It's to see Kishida over there, giving Star Trek references.
I mean, at least some of our viewers probably watching. You froze. I hope you're still with us. You're with us. Watching Shogun, which is now the big hit on one of the broadcast services. And that's when the British were introduced. Apparently, the Portuguese kind of monopolized the Japan connection until the British came along. 16th, 15th century, I think it's played in. But I want to go a little bit on the economic angle. I had no idea that IG Farben, the German petrochemical company, also, I guess, supported Japan's war effort. But getting into this energy war situation, you've all read that the Ukrainians struck a bunch of Russian refineries, and Russia finally struck back and basically de-energized Kharkov, now the big Kiev thermal plant. And I read an article, this was November in Bloomberg, that the petrochemical industry is at a 50-year low. So that's Cold War levels, basically gone. And the other thing, Sean Fu, if you're ever watching this, please come on the show. I know you're too big to us, but you're a great economic guy. Mentioned that Japan is a couple of islands where 60% of the food is imported and 90% of the energy. You know, that's Russia, China, that sort of stuff. Is imported. That for them it's doomsday to be sinking. The yen apparently is now unmoored and sinking compared to the dollar to import anything.
I'm sorry,
it's a death deal to them as well. But go ahead, Ian.
I'm sorry, just to clarify your last comment. So you said the petrol industry is at what? Are you talking?
That's
globally
Europe.
Or Russia? In Europe.
In Europe is at a 50-year low since basically the cheap Russian energy is cut off. I just read, by the way, that still half of Russian exports in LNG, that's the pricey liquefied stuff that you need special ships and special terminals to do, that still comes to Europe. The second is China with 21%. But China has taken basically all the pipeline, the cheap pipeline gas that used to flow to Europe via, among others, Nord Stream. So that's been completely rearranged, and therefore, petrochemical is not just, diesel and kerosene that goes into airplanes. It's plastic. It's the plastic bags, fiber. It's all sorts of products based on petroleum. That's dead in the water in Europe, and Japan apparently is facing a very similar energy woes. I mean, they don't have like 1 million solar panels or 1 million wind farms to get with the green agenda. A lot of that was still imported and not looking good for an import nation. That was the observation.
That reminds me of some of the biggest news that we've had in Ukraine, over the past couple of days since our last episode, was that, the Russia has really done a number on the electrical grid and the power production grid in Ukraine. So they hit a real big, was it hydroelectric production or?
It's a thermal plant, and I think gas-based, the one in Kiev, the three something. I always think of Trizub because that's the what do you call it? The trident, the Ukraine symbol.
So they're finally, taking these steps. And the reason I think this step was taken, because the U.S. would have done this on day one, right? Like when the U.S. would have gone to war, they would have just destroyed the infrastructure capacity, the electrical capacity of that whatever country they're attacking on day one.
People dug up articles that they boasted about this thing in Yugoslavia, exactly as you said, like de-energizing the Serbs. They boasted about it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So that, that was a response to perhaps, the concert attack, perhaps the drone attacks on Russian, oil
pipelines, refineries, infrastructure.
Yeah. So what we see is, a slow escalation as a response, an escalatory response to the actions from the West and Kiev. But what I want to point out is from the very beginning, from 2014, we see a slow rollout of escalatory mechanisms by the West. So it started with javelins, right? Are we going to send lethal aid? And everybody was like, no, that's a step too far. We're not going to send lethal aid.
Yeah, at the time, the Germans sent helmets, I think. They sent helmets.
And it's kind of like you could imagine how this was all planned out years ago. And they're like, okay, we're going to roll things out like this. We're going to do a slow escalation over the years. And then at some point, we're going to get our boots on the ground, right? We're going to get that's going to be one of the final escalatory, steps in order to have a full war with Russia if necessary. We're going to try and avoid that, but these are all the steps we can take and roll out over a several years time. So that's the question. Like, has this been planned out? Like, is there no doubt that there's going to be a full regional war because the resistance is preparing for that? I mean, you see Kim Jong Un in North Korea saying, "Hey, it's war. Let's mobilize. This is going to go down." And so they're sending a message to the resistance that we're not going to back down, and they have no reason to think they're going to back down. It's only prudent and responsible for the resistance countries to prepare for full war. Do you guys agree?
So we're talking about the Asia Pacific region now, because I was still in Ukraine. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm talking
Merging
Iran, North Korea, China.
The axis of evil. The axis of evil is there.
The resistance.
Or, just quickly, a couple of comments still sticking to Ukraine. One thing I found fantastic is they've been bombarded with these FAB 3000s. Apparently, this was a brand new missile, even more advanced than the Kinjar. Maybe Ian knows about this, that hit this and destroyed. All the headlines where it's utterly destroyed this thermal power plant. It's interesting that no apartment blocks got hit recently now that there's no air defense. Just something to think about, because they like to put that in.
Right.
Liked to put that in civil areas, and apparently everybody's hunting for the fabled Patriot system, which is nowhere to be found. That's observation one when it comes to Ukraine. And the second one is that they dream. I don't know why they still dream that they're going to have this peace formula, the Zelensky 10-point peace plan, and they're planning for it in Switzerland. I think the date has been set to be mid-June. And Lavrov just basically addressed it, that saying, no, this is a road to nowhere. It's a capitulation plan. We're ready to talk seriously, but this is not it. And if we want to still stick with this, we can move on next. But I have a quick, serious appearance by Vasilina Benzia, who is the main ambassador of Russia to the UN, who had some interesting things to say. And I'm just going to do maybe 1.5 speed. I really like it that he's a big, bold man who kind of looks like the father of Hungarian communism, but the translator is like a cute, girly sound. But check this out.
Nothing more than a private military company fighting for the West using Western weapons, and they're fighting to the last Ukrainian. All that's left for the Kiev regime to do under the circumstances is, in their impotent rage and in the worst terrorist traditions, to deliberately shell peaceful neighborhoods in Russian cities. They're conducting actual terrorist attacks, and this is how the Kiev regime will go down in history, a monstrous, inhumane regime of terrorists and Nazis. A regime that's traded in the interests of its people, sacrificing them in return for Western money and handouts for the benefit of Zelensky and his inner circle. Under these circumstances, attempts of the leader of the Kiev regime to promote his formulae, to convene summits in support of the Kiev regime, provoke nothing but bafflement. Very soon, the only topic at any international meeting on Ukraine will be the unconditional surrender of the Kiev regime. I advise you all to prepare for this in advance. Thank you very much.
I advise you all to prepare for this in advance. Thank you very much. By the way, you can take this as war propaganda. I only have written stuff about it, but Vladimir Putin met with Lukashenko, the Belarusian leader, in Moscow, and he said that these strikes we had to respond to the strikes on the energy sector, so that's quoted, but he also said that for humanitarian reasons, we didn't want to do this in the winter, because, hospitals and schools without heating and all that, so that's his official reasoning behind this. That's what I wanted to add to the Ukraine story. Now we can go wherever you want.
Well, I'll add that the numbers are out for 2023, and the Ukrainian birth rate is now at around 1.0. It's actually just in raw numbers.
Oh God, I have to find something.
One of the lowest in Ukrainian history. That region back in the early 1800s, like 1721. I remember there was an exact year cited. So that last year's was around 186,000 live births, and it was actually higher than that. Even back when the Ukraine region had around 5-6 million people in total, it was around 250,000 live births a year. So it's actually lower than it was in the early 1800s, where you had a fraction of the population. So
Wow.
it's a little bit misleading. I have to be fair, it's a little bit misleading because a lot of the refugees are not in Ukraine. So if a woman's pregnant, she might go to Germany or something, have the child there. But still, that's looking really bad for Ukraine demographically. They really did.
How about this?
Decimate a whole generation.
I mean, that's
Oh,
amazing.
wow.
But kudos to the New York Times for actually running an infographic, but that's horrendous. Most of these graphs look like basically a pyramid, most in the middle and sort of tapering off to the end. This whole is exclusive to Ukraine. So one day we'll hear about the actual casualty numbers, and I'm afraid it's going to be half a billion or more.
And I don't
Half a million,
think,
sorry.
I don't know if we covered this in the previous show, but they did push through that new mobilization bill.
Yeah.
And there were a couple big factors in it. One, they removed most, like even the horrendous medical deferments, like HIV. Being HIV positive is no longer a medical deferment, which is very serious because for soldiers, you have to be able to give blood to each other. There's just a lot of, it's an environment where you don't want someone who's HIV positive, even on medication where you can get the viral levels low. You just don't want an HIV positive person in that environment. But they lifted that restriction. And also it's Ukraine. Russia has a similar problem with HIV. It's just worse in Ukraine. So where a lot of people just don't take the
What about Down syndrome?
Yes,
I think I'm not going to show it, but I think
waivers for that, or does that mean you still have to go to the front? I mean, it's just I've seen some videos.
Epilepsy,
we all have
mentally handicapped. Just all those waivers are gone now.
Invalids, they all have to be rechecked for mobilization, and of course, everybody's pressuring them to just roll out the women, which they have been. Sadly, there's a lot of new gravestones with women.
The big thing, I would say, one of the most significant aspects of this bill, though, is that they got it through on this promise that I think even Zelensky said this. Part of we're not doing this just because of losses. We're doing this to get the boys home. Those guys who have been at the front since January, February of 2022, can after 2 years of being in the trenches go home. But now they're saying, well, just kidding. Actually, those guys are still stuck there. We're not We're not going to do a demobilization. It's 500,000 in addition to who we already have at the front. It's not a rotation.
There seems to be trouble with discipline. I don't remember which sort of regiment this is, but there was in Sputnik, so Russian sources, but sources within this Azov battalion said no. They said no to defending Chasov Yar. They just said, fuck that, we're not following this order. So there's a growing problem of that too, people not following the meat grinder orders. Sorry, Carlo.
I'm sorry. The conscription age in Ukraine, it's curious to me. Maybe someone can help me out with this. Didn't they just lower it? It was in the mid-20s, and you couldn't have anyone younger than somebody 26.
27. Yeah.
It went from 27 to down to
5.
That's
25.
curious because I was
This is the chart that we saw. The birth rate dropped in the 90s so much, and after they're afraid of.
Oh, I see.
Killing the future population.
I see. Thanks. That's a good.
Also, if you go to Telegram channels, you will see, unfortunately, gravestones of people who are 70. So, yeah, these are just the headlines. It's not. I don't think it's the full reality.
There's a couple of points I want to make on that question, Carlo. Actually, so one, in World War II, the average age of an American serviceman in World War II was 26. In Vietnam, it was 19. And that's because there was a different mobilization strategy. In World War II, they were just drafting people. You go in that age, in those eligible age cohorts. In Vietnam, because the draft was unpopular, they were avoiding college age people and people with, because if you're a middle class or upper middle class person, you have a job, you don't want to go to Vietnam. So there would be pushback from those. So they were trying, so they couldn't really go over the college age. So they just went younger. So they were just grabbing high school. So it was actually unusual on a global standpoint for soldiers to be that young. We kind of have this, I think that's kind of, and I think for Americans, it seems weird to have older people on the front lines. I think globally, it's more true though, because we've kind of fallen into this model of getting volunteers right out of high school. And also I think because for both Russia and Ukraine, so like when Russia did their mobilization, the average age of a mobilized reservist in October in that
was older, right?
35 was the average age. So they were going for guys who were, if you're going to have children, you probably already do by that point. They didn't want, and I think it's also a cultural mentality that both Ukraine and Russia have, because they had World War II. They have real wars. They have serious casualties. They're queasy about sending kids off to meet grinders. So I think culturally they are happier with people in their late 20s or 30s and 40s even going to war. And so it's kind of the same thing with Ukraine, because Ukraine, unlike Russia, does have to do conscriptions every month. And so they don't want to send college age. They don't want, you do find examples of younger guys who volunteered, but mostly the conscripted guys are over 27. They just, they're just very, and I think if you start drafting people who can afford to send their kids to university, there's going to be political pushback. So that's why they're still not sending 21-year-old, even though Lindsey Graham. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I wanted to add something funny, because you've probably seen the exemptions. These made Ukrainian headlines as well as Russian ones. Do you know the latest exemptions? One was circus workers and the TV channels. They are critical and essential for Ukraine. So clowns and PR people, they still don't get.
So, it sounds like, drafting women, drafting younger people, these are contingencies that they can definitely pursue in the future. But right now, they're going to limit themselves to mobilizing, males up to or down to 25 years of age. But for now, I guess, certain people are safe. But that doesn't mean that in a month from now that can change. Depending on the conditions. So it's just, what's unconscionable is how the West has no regard. They don't care that all these people are dying. Like it doesn't matter to them. And it just shows you the true principles that govern, the West. And it's not liberal at all. There's nothing liberal about it. It's sick and cynical. Am I breaking up again? I see I'm frozen on the screen.
You're frozen, but we can.
The audio is great.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to mention Gregor's comment going back to Japan.
This is the LDP, like the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan. And I didn't look up the history, but that is very interesting. Thank you, Gregor. Carlo's friend, Gregor Yankovic.
The history, of course, was that Japan did not want to surrender to the Soviet Union, but it was the Soviet Union's declaration of war against Japan that caused them to surrender. But they were more than happy to surrender to the United States. And ever since then, they've been a vassal. So the United States totally controls their economy and their politics. And there's been assassinations of socialists, popular socialist politicians have been assassinated. You guys are probably familiar with the assassination with the sword on stage. Just a guy got killed with a sword. A socialist got killed with a sword by a fascist. Probably with great ties to Western intelligence. Go ahead, sir.
More a dagger, like a tanto, a short sword, a dagger. But yes,
fair.
It's famous because there was a picture just before the moment he died.
I thought it was a katana, but maybe it wasn't a katana.
It's a shorter thing.
Okay.
The big thing, I would add, the big thing with Japan in World War II is they were even early 1945 were actually approaching the Soviet Union, because the big thing Japan, and not the USA, and the reason why is Japan was fishing for a conditional surrender. They wanted to keep the empire and they wanted to keep the emperor in power. Ironically, they did keep the emperor in power as a authority figure. But that was when Truman took office. He was big on, he wanted Japan to unconditionally surrender. That was partially what led to the 2 nuclear bombings to force that.
I think this is factual, but I don't have it at my fingertips. I read that there was a big headline, or maybe Emperor Hirohito did a radio address to the nation, and it was like the best understatement ever in history. And he said that events in the war have turned not necessarily in our favor. I think that's what he said after the two bombings. Just a small anecdote.
So yeah, I mean, ever since then, they have just been a stronghold of Western imperialism to project power. You know, like Australia, like South Korea, Japan, Western Europe, and so it's unfortunate. I mean, the people have benefited because they've had a quality of life. You know, they've had higher living standards thanks to the Marshall Plan-esque aid that we gave them to help build them back up after the war. You know, as a stronghold against the communist bloc. So, you know,
I don't know how true that is, because it's glitzy, it's neon-like, but you know, they always call it the famous work ethic, but they are the most overworked people on the planet. They have worse demographics than Europe, and that's saying something, because Europe has a very aging population, you know. And you know, Plaza Accords, basically what they were good at was electronics and robots that got, you know, cut from under them. And apparently some Western magazines, Bloomberg included, said they're fudging a lot of numbers to show that great GDP prosperity, which is Western tradition. So yeah, that's a Western thing.
No, and it's definitely it's not improving. Like, their economy is in the decline, just like South Korea, just like the United States. I mean, all of the West their economies are declining. But you know, after World War II, of course, the United States was untouched. They accounted for half the global economy, and with that 50%. Huge disproportion of wealth, they were able to build up other, you know, strongholds against the communists. Well, so they gave aid. They gave a lot of economic aid to South Korea, Japan, Western Europe, and while at the same time, of course, they had an embargo against the socialist states, and they were engaged in sabotage and undermining them, and so. That was the Cold War that we saw play out. But definitely, you know, there was a time where, you know, you would hear Westerners do comparisons of South Korea with North Korea and say, look, capitalism is obviously better. Look how people are living in South Korea. And
they use that.
Go ahead.
And they used that satellite photo, which was that was taken on Earth Day. Earth Day is when North Korea shuts off all the lights and say, this is for the planet. They took that picture then and they use it. Look what communism does. Elon Musk uses that goddamn picture. I wanted to add something also funny, not kind of funny, but important. In Europe, you know, we have the Sovereignty Protection Bureau in Hungary, which is kind of like your foreign agent law, where money comes from. And I looked at the list of identified, obviously, NED, George Soros' Open Society Foundation. And the third one is interesting because it's the German Marshall Fund. It's identified as US money, US influence. So I think people in Europe should take notice. If you have a TV channel or something funded by the German Marshall Fund, it might not be peddling for your best interests. Just a small, interesting tidbit.
Well, we definitely, I mean, our propaganda apparatus, you know, is just as powerful, if not more powerful, in those countries that, you know, are our ideological allies, you know, the South Korea, Japan, Western Europe. So it's
new puppets in town.
And that was our goal, our agenda after the Soviet Union was dismantled in a undemocratic coup. Of course, total full spectrum dominance was the title for the strategy that was being pursued by the West, was full spectrum dominance. So it's total political, economic, and military control of every country, just like we had control of Japan, Western Europe, South Korea. We wanted to extend that over every country. And so that was a little bit too ambitious. What's his name thought it was going to be the end of history, but they were wrong. And so thankfully for humanity, We have leaders like Xi, leaders like Putin, and so there's some resistance to that plan of full spectrum dominance. Guys, we want to go to Israel. There's a lot to talk about there, or we can stick with China, Eastern Europe.
Well, I hear what Greg has to think about all this.
Say
Which
that again.
part?
Oh, Greg, we've kept you quiet. We're so sorry. Any thoughts at all on the totality of what we've discussed so far? I'm sure there's many.
Well, that one of the things I've been watching is the back and forth about what the U.S. is going to do to defend Israel should Iran retaliate directly. And, there's a lot of articles about back channel deals, and which I believe that the U.S. and Iran do not want to have a war. And they're trying to figure it out quietly. But then at the news conference with the Japanese prime minister, and then I guess the Secretary of Defense started saying, clearly we will defend Israel against Iran no matter what.
Yeah.
It's Ironclad, right? They're supporting.
They say it's Ironclad, yeah. I'm skeptical, but I mean, Israel and the neocons here have wanted us to go to a war with Iran for decades.
So that would be it could very, very well end up in a global economic catastrophe where 20% of the world's energy, or at least oil, is really taken off the market just like that. But what's the context? So the context of all this is, October 7th, Israel, having this genocide against the Palestinians, trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza, probably take it over, add some new settlements there, some beachfront settlements. And then you have the resistance to that, which is the Palestinians, of course, in both Gaza, the West Bank. You have Hezbollah in Lebanon. You have Iran, and you also have Yemen. The true heroes, the heroes of the story that so far I didn't really see this coming, but it's just been so tremendous and heroic. But what Israel did recently, in an effort, it seems, in an obvious effort to draw the United States more into this war, was to hit the Iranian embassy in Damascus, killing some diplomats and generals of both Syria and Iran. And it's just a total war crime, a total provocation, a huge provocation. And so the question is,
during Ramadan, okay? During the holy period, yes.
Makes it even a bigger provocation, if that's even possible. But so that happened. Did that happen like right around our last broadcast, or a little bit before our last broadcast?
I think it's been at least a week now. So before.
Yeah. So we still are awaiting to see Iran's response. And so we've talked about it on a couple episodes, that we believe that Iran is going to be very thoughtful and not really fall for the bait, which definitely seems like an excuse to justify U.S. involvement and a U.S. war against Iran. But we still haven't seen a response from Iran. And like Greg was saying, there's these it's obvious that Iran doesn't want to escalate, and that the U.S. doesn't want to escalate. So they're working behind the scenes trying to figure out how to keep Israel from being able to do something that really pulls the U.S. in. Because there's factions in the U.S., and if Iran did certain things, maybe the argument is it would be political suicide, and it would be politically impossible for the U.S. not to go to war against Iran. But anybody want to explain that? Like, why can't the U.S. just say, fuck you, Israel, you're on your own? Like, why is that politically impossible? Why can't that happen? Why doesn't that happen? Who are the interests? What are the forces keeping common sense from happening in U.S.
I thought Asia was having a big impact. The fact we want Japan to take the same kind of suicidal stance that Ukraine's taking, and Israel has been our ally proxy in the Middle East too, and we don't want Japan to get any doubts as it's signing up for a suicidal war with China.
Yeah,
that was my take.
That touches on the core point, I think, is that the U.S. is behind all of this. I mean, if you think that the U.S. didn't know in advance about the Israeli attack on the Iranian embassy in Damascus,
Which is what they're
you
claiming
might as
now.
well go back to
Right.
kindergarten. That they were behind. They knew everything about it. They've known everything that Israel's done, every heinous crime that they've done, and they're in on it. They're perfectly the U.S. Let's call it the deep state. They're perfectly fine with genociding the Palestinians. In fact, they probably drew up the initial plans. I mean, let's not be naive about these people. They've murdered millions of people, and without the least compunction. So,
Of course, but I'm just going to add the political angle to it, because if it's an election year, everything is about that. That apparently Biden is open to letting go of Julian Assange prosecution. That's obviously to get back some votes, please. The second one is the renewal of forgiving some student loan debt. I think I read 30 million. Anyway, just give me some support back, because what he doesn't want is the horrible PR that goes along with it. And also remember the energy aspect that Billy Bob touched on. I mean, I read in Forbes that there might be another drawdown on Americans' SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserves, that Biden always taps to get the petrol prices back down a little, because high petrol prices at the pump means you're not going to be elected,
Right.
And it has 17 days of supply in it, according to this fucking Forbes article.
It's depleted.
And what Iran can do is destroy the infrastructure of all its neighbors, destroy the and they're so desperate. We all read it. I can put it on screen if you want, that they would give anything to the Houthis, basically all the concessions ever,
Right,
just to please stop this embargo, stop attacking our ships. Number one. Second, the Financial Times reported that they wanted to enlist China to please persuade Iran not to do anything. Please not please don't retaliate. Please don't. So there are economic interests. Of course, there are hot. Of course, there's John Bolton. There's always idiots like him who want a massive war in the Middle East, but I don't think they're the major guys.
right.
I'm legit convinced that the U.S. is trying everything they can do to avoid, being pressured into a war with Iran. And, they're not ready. They want to pivot to Asia. They want to pivot to China. They don't want to have this global economic catastrophe on their hands when the Straits of Hormuz are blocked and oil can't flow through there. And Yemen, it's hilarious that originally they were offering Yemen, hey, if you just stop defending the Palestinians, declare neutrality, we will take you off the state sponsor of terrorism list. And now they've added to that ante. Not only will they take them off the state sponsor of terrorism list, they will stop supporting the Yemen government in exile. They will declare them to be the Houthis to be the official government in Yemen. And they will give them aid and development if they would only stop defending the Palestinians. And do you think the Houthis are going to do that? No, because they're fucking principled.
And their exact words, Billy Bob already had this quote in his mind. I'd really, really love it. That was their response to this huge offer from American. We are not within the circle of those you dictate to. It's beautiful. It really is beautiful.
Inspiring.
And it shows how effective they are.
I think
hugely effective. The Yemenis.
It's always this big debate, whenever a state, a proxy, or just an appendage of the deep state like Israel or Ukraine does something, there's this debate. How much did the central brain know about it and dictate it? And because, on one hand, like, for example, the Crocus City Hall shooting, I'm like, there's no way they could have done those financial transactions without the CIA or the National Security Agency knowing about it. But on the other hand, too, it's understandable that when you're that tail on the dog, I mean, there is some tail wagging the dog. There is. Because if you're those guys, you're just out on a limb. And you're just like, hey, I need to do something really provocative to get them to help me, to do something.
No, that's true. Rogue elements that are not, they have their own little brain and they might not be part of the central brain.
Right.
Yes. And so you can just say, so I think there's probably a lot, because, let's be honest, the war in Gaza is not going well. I mean, they're killing huge numbers of people, but conventionally it's an embarrassment for the IDF. that when you have 10-1 numerical superiority and just half the world's industrial base supporting you, that you can't defeat 20 or 30,000 teenagers with homemade weapons. It's an embarrassment. So they're probably pretty desperate right now. So I could see this idea of just like, we're going to do something really provocative that drags the USA into the fight with us. I mean, that's
the last best hope.
So
Carlo made this point earlier that there were reports from Israel that we destroyed 30% of Hamas. Then I think Nasrallah said probably 10%. But reality is we don't know. Nobody knows. The US doesn't know the extent of those networks of people, but we know there are still active fighting. The Markava tanks are still being destroyed. And one thing I'll add to that, a rare opinion piece, like a full editorial on Haaretz, I think it was yesterday. This was the title, Saying What Can't Be Said. Israel has been defeated, a total defeat.
Oh,
I
wow.
don't recall, but that's a big fucking headline. Go ahead, Carlo.
So I just want to ask you guys. So how do you read the IDF pulling out 3 brigades from Hamas and moving them toward the north? How do you guys read that?
Do they really want to do that? Like attack Hezbollah in Lebanon? Do they really want to do that?
I don't think so.
I mean, Vladimir Putin, I think this was a couple of weeks ago, he increased the troop size and the air defense in the occupied Golan Heights in Syria. So if they want to do that, that's going to be interesting because that's a whole new caliber of opponent.
No,
I think they're only interested in widening the war if the U.S. jumps in.
Yeah.
Well,
if the U.S. doesn't want to jump in, there's not going to be any war widening.
So going with the idea that the U.S. knew about the attack on the Syrian embassy, what's our logic for that?
Well, Karine Jean-Pierre says that we were given very little advance notice. Like this was last minute for us. That's the White House press. Their official is, well, we were caught off guard. If they knew about that, I don't know. Maybe they sure didn't try to stop it because they could. I don't know what.
I mean, I think it's part of the rogue elements. And I remember with JFK, you had people out. I mean, assuming the president's the central brain. So if we're saying the president and his administration is the central brain, you definitely have rogue elements that created the Bay of Pigs against Kennedy's will, brought him this conundrum, assuming Kennedy was going to go all in and send in the military to save the Bay of Pigs invaders, and so this was a rogue element that was trying to corner the central brain into behaving in a particular way, into an escalatory way. And so, I mean, I could see the same thing with this attack on the embassy.
I think that's plausible. The other possibility I have is the other war next door, which is still going, is Syria. Is, the U.S. agenda may be to weaken the Iranian help there still.
Which is where the Russians are, which is why I brought it up. Responding to Fleur, here's what you have to keep in mind. Whatever happens, the direct attack at some big Israeli military target or something like that, like that nuclear...
Dimona,
that they have many other options. Some weapons could appear that the resistors didn't have in, say, Iraq, in Lebanon, or in the Houthi, as in the Yemeni armed forces. They could have the resistance attack some very lonely and vulnerable American bases in Iraq and in Syria. They have a whole host of options that they could do to avenge this without getting into the red lines of declaration of, which would force a declaration of war from Israel. So they have many options, and they're not going to play the game, the script that Israel wrote them. That's just my 10 cents. Of course, we're all waiting. We're all waiting for the response.
One other thing they've been starting. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Talk about sending arms to the West Bank, which I don't think Iran has acknowledged before, which they're now doing.
Yeah, true enough.
I just wanted to say something about the Bay of Pigs, and that is that the plan was that the anti-Castro Cubans would be successful on their own, but the backup plan was aerial bombing of the Castro forces, and that's what Kennedy didn't do when the anti-Castro army was failing. And that's what That's what heated up Allen Dulles and the CIA, and that eventually led. That was one of the factors which led to Kennedy getting his head blown off, as I wrote, like a barn door in a cyclone. But so I just wanted to alter that a little bit.
No, I agree. I agree with that, and I
No,
hope I
alter it.
didn't give a different picture, paint a different picture.
But okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean
No,
to get
so
off track there.
did I know a lot of people had, and I love everybody has things to contribute. I wanted to make the point that the Houthis have pledged 400,000 troops if Iran gets attacked to help defend Iran, and I wanted to make the point that there is, the reason that the U.S. is not interested in war with Iran is because there's no military option. Like, they don't have a viable winning military option, and that's why they don't want war, because there could be easily 1 million people trained under arms, on the side of the resistance. How is the U.S. going to deal with 1 million people? You got 400,000 Houthis. You probably have 400 to 500,000 Iranians, and then you have Hezbollah. You have Syria, the Syrian Arab Army, and then you have some Russians in there. So there's no Israel can't deal with that. Saudi Arabia is not gonna initiate another war with them. I mean, they couldn't even take Yemen with all the U.S. Support that they had.
Let's hope they learn. And other breaking news, I've only seen it like half an hour before the show and only on social media, so pinch of salt, but it's probably going to be official soon. I think it was Qatar. Yes, Qatar and Kuwait said that the RA air bases, which are basically US air bases, cannot be used for a strike against Iran. So even the rich Mercedes-loving, diamond-loving Gulf monarchies are saying, no, this is not something we're going to be a party to.
And there's a lot of resistance too. I just want to throw that in.
Thank you.
But
a big thing is, but go ahead.
The other implicit threat if Iran gets attacked is that the Gulf oil producers will also have their production facilities hit by Iran, which...
Yeah, implicit. But also they can cut off, which one is it? The Bab el-Mandeb is the Houthis, and the Strait of Hormuz, right? Is what Iran can absolutely lock down, where a lot of the Gulf monarchies do their export routes. So bad news yes, the US is an oil producing nation, but not in the quantities necessary. I think that's been proven by the strategic reserves. It's bad news for everyone.
Ian, I'm so sorry. I was just going to say, in this context, Iran is being very responsible by not reacting, by not responding to that provocation. They are being ultimately responsible. They're keeping from dragging the world into this nightmare that Israel really, really, really wants. And the U.S. is smart enough not to be dragged into it as well. But Ian, I'm sorry. What was
what I was going to say is that I think Hezbollah and Iran are both kind of in the same position, because Hezbollah had that war with Israel that was devastating, and Iran has had peace longer, but they, just in the 80s had that war with Saddam. So the problem is that if you're rebuilding and you have some semblance of economic prosperity, you have a lot to lose if you go into a war. So I think a lot of it's just common sense and self-interest. If
Israel's running out of things to lose.
Well, if Hezbollah declares war, if Iran declares war, there will be, and there will be war destruction, and they have a lot to lose. And also, we have to consider the fact that Israel is a nuclear power, while as right now, Iran is not. The Houthis, I think, are a different set of people, because they've been at war for years. They're in that boat of they're already war torn. They're at that point. We've been at war so long, so what if we have another war? They're in that mindset. Iran is like, well, if we go into a war that kills huge numbers of people, destroys the economy, do they want to do that? There's a lot to lose. So that's probably at least part of the reason why they're so restrained. And thinking about, they might not, and it's possible they might not have expected Israel to do something so brazen. So a week later, because all of the U.S. predictions were, this week. Well, here we are on Friday, and Iran.
I think the latest one is 48 hours. They love their 48 hours.
Was there an additional? Oh, go ahead.
Realistically, what can Iran do? I think Billy Bob, you're right. They'll probably do something more subtle. There's other things they can do. They can give weapons to certain people, they can do something more under the radar that is a response and hurts Israel and deters the USA. And I think you're also right. The USA doesn't want to get involved because I think the big difference between Iran and 2003 Iraq, because Iraq and Afghanistan were military victories for the USA. They were political failures and geopolitical failures, but they were military successes. We came in, we kicked Saddam's ass, and we won in 3 weeks or whatever. So they can spend, even though they were political failures, huge political failures, we say, well, we kicked ass, it's fine. But if we go against Iran, if we do some sort of a serious military response against Iran and don't have tangible results, that's
a Ukraine scenario.
It's not even the USA losing against Russia. It's the USA losing against Iran. It's humiliating. I mean, it's beyond humiliating. A world power losing to a regional power.
Look, according to Andrei Marchanov, we all know, hey, it's me again, that guy, the Russian in America. He said the only actual, military victory that the US ever achieved was the Falklands. That's it, because, Vietnam failure, Iraq, Afghanistan.
You mean Grenada?
Falklands.
Grenada. I'm sorry. Yeah,
that's
the Falklands
right,
Falklands was British. Sorry, Grenada. Yeah. But
I mean, the first Gulf War, kind of.
Yeah, but not against a peer opponent, and that's what's different about Ukraine. That's what's different about Iran. But they didn't have any effective airbase, integrated air defense systems. None of that. It's just go and bomb a city, and that's what the US does with these expeditionary forces, and it's different. I want to add just one more thing that you might know. This Ukraine propagandist, he's been all the Slava Ukraine, we're going to win, the West is going to. He had this to say just the other day, like. That to me is a huge turn.
Jay and Pete, I didn't even know he said this. I mean, he's a big Slava Ukrainian guy. That's
big
interesting.
Guy.
His mentality. Is he actually in Ukraine? Is he an actual guy?
I don't think so. I mean, the other thing I was thinking about, I think a couple of weeks ago, we mentioned that some oligarch in maybe an MP in Kiev got the latest electric luxury car. Do you remember this?
Yeah,
I don't know what brand, but what the fuck are you going to do with that now? And that's what awaits Japan and Europe if there is an energy war in the Middle East. Like, you plug it in and nothing happens. Just an observation.
I don't know if we want to shift away from Gaza, but you mentioned the Falklands, and Milei has vowed to take back the Falklands from Great Britain.
And what else has he got?
And well, I mean, that's why I wanted to have Sean Fu on if we could get him, because he was brilliant on what Milei is doing, and he can answer a lot of questions about that, especially what Milei is trying to do, building a currency, cash, in dollars by using the yuan to position himself to get more dollars. I'll let you go look at Sean Fu's video on that. It's brilliant.
Yeah,
but what's interesting about what Milei's doing is he's talking about getting in a conflict with a NATO power, and that will trigger Article 5. So does that mean the United States is going to step in on the side of Britain and take out Argentina, where already 50% of the people are living in poverty?
Yeah, and they have dengue fever. It's returned. That's how terrible things are in Argentina.
I think he's just talking. I think it's all talk. I mean, I don't know much about Argentina's military capabilities, but I wouldn't expect they're very high. I mean, to be fair, the UK's military capabilities have definitely deteriorated, but I think he's all talk. I don't think.
Yeah, but his IQ's not very high either. So.
Well, he's an anarcho-capitalist.
Well, being fit, I mean, I can say I'm going to go bench press 500 pounds right now, just because I'm dumb enough to think I didn't do it. Doesn't mean I'm going to get those weights off the ground,
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he is. Maybe he's still talking to his dead dog. That's where he gets his advice on taxes and international politics. I don't know.
I cringed when Tucker Carlson, I tried to take Tucker Carlson seriously, but it's just like he did that Milei interview, and it's just like, oh my gosh. Dude.
Compared to the Putin interview, this is kudos to the viewers. It got basically no views. Nobody was really interested. You know, it was very, very low views. I didn't
think
care to
Tucker
watch it.
Carlson, not to go on too big of a tangent, but I think Tucker Carlson's, what makes him popular is that he's that kind of average Joe. He's that common sense. He sees these crazy, just insane politics happening, and he has that common sense. He was like, what's going on? Why are we doing this? This doesn't make any sense. It's stupid. But the problem is that when you can take him outside of his depth, and unfortunately, you know, I was very excited. I was anticipating a Tucker Putin interview for a long time.
Me too.
But it was, you know, and I was excited to watch it. I watched it when it went live, and, you know, I was super stoked about it. But, you know, looking back, it was just like, it was clear he was out of his depth. He was really out of his depth.
But that's why I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the Russians like him because he is this like a simple American everyman. That's what he is. I think
he's a very stereotypical, like I've had Russians tell me even, it's just like even his face. Like he's just, you know, you have because when in your mind you can imagine a stereotypical Frenchman or a stereotypical German or a stereotypical Russian. So to Russians, he's just a stereotypical American is how they
that's what
expect him. Or like how you went to Vikusny Tachka and bought, you know, 2 double burgers. It's just a very stereotypical American thing. That's why they like him. He's just they're very curious about him. And even when I watched the interview, it just felt like he was running out of questions, which is weird. You're talking to Putin of all people. And it felt like Tucker ran out of questions. He was asking about AI and this other bullshit. It's like, it's just like, there's so many things. And even Putin said he was kind of expecting hard questions. So it was just like he did no research whatsoever or preparation. It was disappointing. I think that's kind of, I want to segue that back to what we were talking about, Gaza. I think is very
right.
It's a problem because you have people like Tucker, because, you know, Tucker is not, you know, some outsider, right? He's a very establishment guy. His father was Voice of America, who is in Moscow.
CIA.
He's a very mainstream. In 2005, no one would have even looked twice at Tucker. He'd just be a very typical Republican, but now he's a Nazi. He's a right-wing extremist. It's just like, I think it's really
Christian fascist.
Yeah. Yes. It's just, I think it's really unfortunate because you do have some people like Tucker on both the left and the right who are just like, hey, what's going on? This is weird. This is stupid. But unfortunately, we don't have the tools. We don't have the information base to tell right from wrong. So we
don't have the ideological understanding to figure out the different situations and all the context.
Well, he did an interview, a whole program about the Christians in Gaza and the Christians in Israel.
Tucker Carlson?
Yes, to try to persuade Christians in America that they should be against what Israel is doing.
Yeah.
Because evangelicals in this country so overwhelmingly support Israel to produce Megiddo, to produce
that was
the end of the world.
Final war.
Yeah.
You know. So
it was a good take by Tucker. I mean, that was good work, better than his Malay work. He interviewed a Palestinian Christian pastor and talked about how Christians are persecuted not only in the occupied territories but in Israel itself. And the point is to get U.S. Christians, because a lot of them are Israel firsters, due to their theology, their backwards theology about how Israel is God's chosen people. We've got to protect Israel and defend Israel because the Bible says that God will bless those who bless Israel. So if we want God's blessings as a nation, we have to bless Israel. So they literally believe that, and that's why they're Israel first.
Well, there's another dimension to that.
We should answer.
That's where the final battle is going to take place, and then all the Jews will die and go to hell. They don't give a rat's rectum about what happens.
Fair. That's true. That's an additional point.
They're going to hell.
Yes.
Because
unless they accept Christ, but they will accept Christ. You'll see. Go ahead, Ian.
We should answer Christy's question.
Okay.
I was going to ask you. Maybe you're the best one to answer.
I have not. I'm going to be honest. I have not heard that sound bite. I'm not familiar with that sound bite. But I would give a general answer that I don't think Putin thinks that much about Tucker Carlson. I think he's over. I think especially the anti-Russian, anti-Putinist people blew Tucker, because I think to Putin, he's just another talking head in the West. And, it's very clear, even within his interview, Putin didn't obsess with the Tucker. Oh, I'm going to interview Tucker Carlson. I don't think Putin even prepared for the interview. He just showed up. He talked about Russia and why they're at war or during their special military operation with Ukraine, why they want to denazify Ukraine. He just kind of shot from the hip. And he stopped thinking about the interview after it was over. He doesn't care that much about
I think I remember that the Kremlin was concerned for his safety. So maybe it was not that you're dangerous, but maybe you're putting yourself in danger or something like that. My best part of the interview that's sort of burned in my head is when he mentioned, Daddy worked for the CIA, the organization you were going to join. And he was just like completely frozen, no answer, nothing, not even a breath. And we are all glad that you didn't join it. That was a memorable part.
Well, I think Tucker Carlson did the smart thing, because remember when Tucker said that the Biden administration had threatened him if he did an interview with him.
Maybe that's what that's about.
Well, I think what's happened, and this is my guess, I'm pretty sure I'm right, is that Tucker talked to his lawyers. They said, okay, what are the Spanish Fobs is probably right. Putin is ironic a lot. I think Tucker talked to his lawyers and said, okay, could the Biden administration prosecute me? And if they did, on what grounds would they prosecute me? So I think that's when they said, okay, I have an ironclad way to go and interview Putin without getting prosecuted. And maybe that's why they mentioned that to American journalists. His lawyers told him, hey, if you go in, mention this American journalist, you can make that argument. You were speaking on behalf of the USA. So maybe I think he just had a long consultation with his lawyers, and they did all of their homework, and he went in and did the interview in a way that he could not on any grounds be prosecuted for it.
Yeah, no, that could have been a conscious strategy he was pursuing. My answer to Christy, a plausible answer could be because Putin did mention the propaganda apparatus. He mentioned the efficacy of the Western propaganda apparatus. And he could just be saying, generally speaking, Tucker is part of that propaganda apparatus. And that propaganda apparatus is absolutely dangerous in that it can affect and influence the opinions of so many people around the world to, have the wrong perspective on things like they do. But I mean, who knows? That's one plausible way that Tucker could be dangerous as part of this,
and it was a follow-up. I think Christy is right. That was with Dmitry Kiselyov. That was a much more regular, well-researched thing. Yes.
It could just be his monumental ignorance, Carlson's monumental ignorance. Being ignorant is dangerous. That's why
a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous.
Let me just. I'm going to deviate a little bit here, but I got really hot with Scott Ritter a couple of nights ago and Jeff Norman, because I was watching their show, and there's this guy in Brooklyn who calls in, and he's always drinking with his buddies down at the bar, and they were in the Union. And he's talking about the bridge in Baltimore, Francis Scott Key Bridge, which I've been over many times. And he claimed that the reason it collapsed because it was made out of cheap Chinese steel.
The copium.
And
who said that? Did Scott Ritter say that?
No, again,
the Stalin guy said that.
Uh-huh.
So I said, well, that's not right. And anyway, but Scott and Jeff Norman, they're just drooling over this guy. Scott, just let me know where you're going to be. I'll come down and have drinks with you. I'll have a few beers with you. It's that, working, we're rubbing elbows with the working class. And Jeff Norman's going, we have to have him on the show every week. And this guy in the Union Hall or wherever the fuck he was pulled it out of his ass. It took me like 2 minutes to determine it was the Pittsburgh and Des Moines Steel Corporation.
Well, it was built in the 1970s. There was basically no China steel.
The Chinese owned. They didn't own it. I mean, it was all American steel that collapsed into the Chesapeake Bay. Give me a fucking break.
From Pittsburgh.
And they're drooling over the working class. So ignorance, you got to stay away from ignorant people. And could be what Putin is talking about.
Well,
You
the
know, that kind of
xenophobia
Yeah, true.
which is so endemic to
Tucker has.
American culture.
I was gonna say
It
Carlo
defines.
is the
I'm
peacemaker of the show. He creates the calm that we have here. And you said before the show, but I get the same reaction whenever I watch John Mearsheimer live, who talks a lot of sense, and then he sort of strays into China. Every time he speaks about China, I want to hit something. You know?
Right.
I get that thing.
Our real priority, the real enemy.
Well, like
Yeah.
with the
Oh,
bridge,
talking
I
about-
mean, a freaking barge.
And
It wouldn't have mattered
and if
what
you-
that bridge was made out
Yeah.
of.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And-
the size
and
of an
you-
aircraft
right.
carrier. That thing.
That
by the
too-
way,
that
it's
too.
huge.
But it's like to go back to Scott Ritter also laid into Mearsheimer. You think I'm being loud now?
No, I
Scott
saw that and
Ritter
I was very
blew up
happy. I was
at
happy for
Mearsheimer in
that.
China.
Yes, me
So-
too. I'm glad about
I
that.
missed that one. That sounds interesting.
It might have been a Danny Haiphong one.
Yeah,
I'm not
Danny
sure.
Haiphong,
But I just want to transition quickly. One last story, which was you talked about steel, and apparently there's going to be Nippon Steel, the Japanese, trying to take over the U.S. steel business, and now that's come under scrutiny, even though Kishida's there. Guess why? Because they're looking for the China connection. They're investigating the China connection in the U.S. Steel giant. You know, American Steel, U.S. Steel, something like that. Just something about steel. One thing about all this critical minerals jabber jabber. Ursula von der Leyen, Europe has no critical minerals. China has a lot. Ursula von der Leyen, she flew to Greenland once, right? Then she went to, I think, Australia to secure critical minerals because we need to rearm. And there was just this report. I thought this was interesting that the USIP, I think Institute for Peace, US Institute for Peace, some big organization made a report. The title is far too long for here, but some reports that covered it said the US must enhance critical mineral strategy in Africa because that's where we get cobalt, graphite, manganese, that sort of stuff. So where Macron got booted out by the Africans, not by the Russians, but that apparently the US wants to creep in there too. It's going to be even more interesting now that the Europe and the US, they're facing, there was this big headline, 10 trillion rearmament cost. 10 trillion, 10T. Now they're going to be in competition over critical minerals that are always in, the BRICS block, the multipolar block. I think that's going to be so much fun. Don't you?
So, what we're doing right now is observing Imperial Decline, which happens to be
Accelerating.
the name of our program. But yeah, no, everywhere, that's what we see in all these geographical areas and all these situations. It's just, and the question is, how is the West going to respond to it? Are they going to accelerate it by, upping the ante? Or are they going to come to their senses and embrace this multipolarism where they're no longer the global hegemon and where they're going to have to deal with other strong powers in a way that that they're not used to dealing with them as equals. So that's the question. But guys, we've had a great discussion and we have no need to stop. But I wanted to say something, and so I did. But we can continue wherever anybody is at.
Concluding
I wanna
thoughts, go,
add
Carlo.
something to Ben, and yeah, the whole notion that have AFRICOM on the one hand, that's in 53 of the 54 countries. Eritrea is the only country in Africa that's resisted AFRICOM, and you have the Belt and Road Initiative on the other side. But what a lot of African leaders, if they're not saying publicly, are thinking, and I've heard number of them say this, including Ruto, basically kind of did 180. But this new guy, Faye, is look,
Senegal, yeah.
the United States, the CIA, you murdered Lumumba, you murdered Nkrumah, you murdered Sankara, while the Russians aided us in Angola and Zimbabwe. I mean, the whole list. You were South Africa. You were against us. You were for the forces of oppression, whereas the Soviet Union at the time was helping us liberate ourselves. And so, what the fuck? Why do we want to have anything to do with you?
Yeah. That's where my attention goes. Because anybody else want? Because I have quick little addendum that apparently now military instructors have appeared in where the young guy, Burkina Faso, I think, Ibrahim Traore's land. Yeah, I mean, that's not the same as going into plunder. That's being invited, like they were invited in Syria, because, you know, you treat us like partners, and we like this a lot more. This is happening. In the meantime, what's happening, just to add a couple of things that were big headlines, both in Chinese Global Times and in TASS, that, you know, Lavrov arrived immediately on the heels of Janet Yellen in Beijing, met with Xi, met with Wang Yi, and they, the Russians and the Chinese, discussed that there's going to be a defense cooperation in the BRICS, not the ASEAN. The ASEAN is sort of Western dominated, but the BRICS and the Shanghai cooperation, there's going to be a defense aspect to it. The second big developing story is, just like OPEC is a kind of cartel for energy, for oil, the BRICS countries are thinking about a grain exchange among them, a BRICS grain exchange. These are if you want to eat, if you want to have energy, you're going to have to deal in a respectful manner with this emerging bloc. And Africa, it looks more and more like, faster and faster, to be part of this world. Iran, obviously, what is called the axis of evil. Latin America could go very, very fast in the other direction, you know, post-Millet, I guess. But I think this is the main trend in this world, and it's picking up speed, if anything.
I want to agree with Carlo that, you know, any rational leader in Africa that cares about his country and his people would obviously side with China, BRICS, and oppose AFRICOM and U.S. neocolonial domination. My issue is I am not, you know, I have a high opinion of the U.S.'s capability of using their soft power apparatus, confusing people with their, you know, with their media, and then getting in place puppet governments that sell their people out. Like, they're very good at this, and they've been
used to be better.
75 years, and so I just don't count out, you know, their ability to maintain, you know, leaders that give fealty to U.S. interests and maintain an anti-China posture. We see that in Argentina. And, you know, we see that declining with what's happening in the Sahel, with Niger, etc. But, you know, they're going to double down their efforts. The U.S. is going to double down their efforts. And so I just hope and pray that, you know, the people of Africa get their shit together and put in leaders that are sane and not going to sell them out.
Right. Accepting the multipolar world peacefully is not an option for the imperialists.
But, not just that. Imagine that Ibrahim Traore went to Moscow, stood next to Putin and said, yeah, how about a nuclear power station? You know, that's like brazen. And Putin said, sure, we'll build one. Like that, you're going to have power there, which means you're going to have industry there. They're going to package the cocoa, the coffee. They're going to do it could be the richest continent in our future because it's that resource rich.
Yeah,
it is. What they're not going to
in the future.
Yeah, not going to give it away for free. What they're going to do is do the value-added production, you know, do everything else, and then maybe export it to this declining, rotting shit which we call Western Europe. By the way, Eastern Europe is different. Apparently, Bulgaria is following the footsteps of Hungary, doing this foreign agent law, you know, foreign funding, that sort of stuff, and they're getting shit from the EU for it. But yeah, I mean, the other news was the Friendship Games. Lavrov said it's based on the Olympic Charter of Fairness and leave politics out of it. And apparently 100 countries, including Ukraine, are invited to it. I mean, what's amazing about BRICS, SCO, that sort of stuff is they were just a loose sort of trade bloc, I guess. But they're developing these institutions. And it's not going to be long before they have a world court, before they have like an arbitration in economic trade matters. It's being forced by the West.
Because
they're hastening
it. These global institutions are absolutely necessary. What is superfluous is the U.S. domination of them and you know, manipulation of them to serve Western interests. So we need the institutions. We just need them without U.S. domination, and I think that's what BRICS can definitely offer. And they're moving us towards that world.
They are, because just this week, last one, sorry, short one. Every Security Council nation, China, Russia, all of them voted for full membership for Palestine. US vetoed it, and it's showing like this is rotten. You guys are the one that are rotting this system. It doesn't work.
And most surprising about the law against NGOs coming into your country unregistered, Georgia Georgia. That's for me is huge. There's a flip flop. I was so surprised to see that they signed on to that.
Yeah,
that
no,
law.
that's great. That's great to see.
So
Yeah.
I was going to
Similar
add
in
something else, but
it's similar in most Eastern European nations that the leadership is rabidly anti-Soviet, meaning anti-Commun, meaning anti-Russia, but the majority of people are completely the opposite. I think it's the same way in Georgia. I know a couple of Georgians, and
I
they're
think
Russophiles.
African countries are looking toward Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, and I think and Senegal too, because in Senegal
And Chad and Central African Republic.
Yeah, Central African Republic. I mean, they're looking to see how successful they're going to be, even with, but the problem is, and Billy Bob sort of alluded to it, is that the United States is not going to make it an easy path for them. So, and they've already done that in Senegal, but it backfired on them because this kid comes out of nowhere and he wins the presidential election. So, and also wanted to add that there's stuff brewing in Moldova and Transnistria, and the ousted Prime Minister of Moldova who was pro-Russian, is making a lot of noise, and it's probably the right time given the fact that the Russian offensive is advancing with a little bit more alacrity than it has in the past. It seems to be moving forward because now we're talking about what's Ukraine going to do? Are they going to use common sense and save Odessa and Kharkiv from being overrun by the Russians, or are they going to be ninnies and let Russia eventually take Odessa and Kharkiv and link up with Transnistria, which is definitely going to make Moldova very relevant in that regard. So
I think so too.
Russia's really in the driver's seat here in Ukraine, no doubt.
It's not just it's wonderful that the ex-prime ministers get to talk freely, while the actual current governing, which is Maya Sandu, a little complete puppet, has full West. It's not just Transnistria, which is the Pridnestrovia Moldovan Republic undeclared, but also Gagauzia. I might be saying that wrong. There was this chick who went straight to Moscow, very friendly with Putin. All the people, they welcomed her at an airport, like maybe a couple of thousand. I'm not good at numbers. Welcomed them and hey, thank you, finally someone. Whereas Maya Sandu is facing protests wherever she goes.
Yes.
So a lot of that is going on. A lot of that.
Have you talked to Putin, Ian, since you're both there in Moscow?
We have beers every weekend.
Did he explain? I mean, honestly, Putin is not driving what he's going to do. What Russia's going to do is going to be related to what Ukraine does, and Ukraine's going to do what is dictated to them by the West. So, depending on how that goes, Kharkiv could definitely be absorbed, and Odessa could definitely be absorbed, or not if they're willing to have a rational peace based on reality. And that's what Lavrov was saying. We talked about that earlier. Guys, it's been a great discussion. Is that too what's that word? Is that
it's
too
abrupt a little bit? But I think, and Ian and I, we're on different clubs with this, but I think it's looking more like an inching closer to collapse. The curtains are drawing, is my take. Whereas Ian, I think, says at least months or years.
Are you getting worried that your prediction?
No, I'm actually not. I think summer 2025 is still an accurate prediction. We'll see how close I am to the mark.
It's an ongoing. We should put some. I don't know. Put some.
Have a betting pool. Maybe that'll get some people invested. Yes.
Well, I ran some numbers, and this is just, specious, but the
the Russians say Avdiivka. Maybe try that.
Thank you. Avdiivka was taken by the Russians 6 weeks ago, 2 months.
Something like that, a little
And-
more than a
and
month.
now they've advanced, according to McCoris and some of the military people that show them the map of Ukraine. They've advanced 5 miles, or I don't know how many kilometers that is. It's 7 point something kilometers. In that 6 to 8 weeks. So if they move due east. From my perspective, it's another 150 miles. So at that pace, Ian's really kind of on the money. I mean, he may be a little early. It's another 2.5 years.
But
If-
that's
if
that's
Chasov-
some assumptions.
If Chasov Yar, which is the ongoing big battle, wasn't the door to Donbass or the last fortified settlement we have, and it's being fabbed, which is also from Ukrainian headlines, from that it's flat earth, it's fields, guys. It's a very different scenario from there on. But again, we'll keep this going as a betting.
And the level of resistance. I mean, can they maintain this current level of resistance, for the next half a year? So I want to thank all of our viewers. Thank you so much, viewers. We have an international audience. I want to thank my special guest, Greg Rosen. Greg, we let you say a few things. So,
I'm so sorry.
You just gotta shut us up and talk over us sometimes. But really appreciate you being our special guest. We will have you back soon. Ian, Ben, Carlo, I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday.
Greg, it's like being in a big family when and dinner time, you got to fight for the food.
So feel free to interrupt anytime.
Okay.
Okay, we will see you guys Tuesday. Thank you
Thanks
very
for having
much.
me, guys.
Ian.
All right.
Take care. Have a good
Bye,
weekend.
guys.
Bye.